Let's pick up where we left off in the book of Genesis. Excuse me. Genesis chapter 23. We have seen the birth of finally the promised child, Isaac. After Abraham and Sarah waited a long time, tried to insert themselves into the proceedings. Um, But then finally the child was born, Isaac. And then remember, God tests Abraham there famously in chapter 22, asking him to offer up this child of promise. And remember, the Hebrew writer shed some light on that in Hebrews chapter 11, seems to indicate that Abraham's thought process, we're not given that glimpse in the book of Genesis, but the Hebrew writer tells us that Abraham seemed to assume that God would raise Isaac from the dead. And the Hebrew writer adds, and he kind of did that. That's a paraphrase, that Isaac was allowed to live from that. Now, remember, we speculated the age of Isaac. There's no real indications of his age. The only hints that we have is that he was old enough to carry wood. It would have been enough wood to consume a child or a lamb caught in a thicket. He is old enough to reason. When he sees the fire and sees the wood, then he asks his father, but where is the sacrifice? Where's the animal? And so, again, we don't know how old that is, but we do know that he would have been old enough to have those physical and mental capabilities. Now, when we get to chapter 23, we're going to know how old Isaac is. But that doesn't help us with the testing age of Isaac, because we don't know how much time transpires in between chapter 22 and chapter 23. But chapter 23, let me see, I think we've got a slide here. Yes, we have the story of Sarah's death. And so Sarah lived, chapter 23, verse 1 of the book of Genesis tells us, 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Now, a couple interesting things in that. Number one is you think about how rare it is that we're told the death of a woman. These genealogy list is usually where we see them, or in the list of kings, that he lived to such and such and reigned so many years. It is rare to have the woman listed, the status of her death. And if we're not mistaken, she's the only woman whose age is given at death. That's not that unusual, considering there's not many women's death recorded, but she is the only one whose age is revealed. And that may simply be for a couple reasons. Number one is of her status in this story, but also because her age has played a part throughout all of this, hasn't it? And so maybe just kind of summing that up. So we can, through the story of Abraham and Sarah, there's a lot of times where if you're so inclined to do the math, you can figure out some things. And so if we know her age at death, we knew her age when she gave birth to Isaac. And so we can figure out that Isaac would have been 37 years old when Sarah died. And so he's 37 now. Again, that doesn't give us any hint as to how old he was in the testing story of chapter 22, because we don't know how much time transpired, but he's now been 37 years old when Sarah dies. It's about 62 years since they left Haran. And so that basically the story of Abraham that we've been studying so far was from that point on. And so it's been about 62 years that we've studied in about 10, 11 chapters of time. So Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, that is in Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Now, again, I don't know that I'd make too much of this just because the Bible is still new by the time we get to Genesis chapter 23, but this is the first record of a man weeping. But again, it's the book of Genesis. There's going to be a lot of firsts just because it's the first. So I wouldn't make too much of that. Um, but what is interesting now is, and I don't mean to demean Sarah and her importance in this story, but almost more significant than her death is her burial place. The story that we're being told here. Abraham is living in this land of Canaan. That's this land of promise. But remember, it's called the land of promise because it's just promised land. It's not that promise has not been fulfilled. And remember, Abraham was told why. The residents of the land aren't wicked enough for God to be justified to remove them from that land. And so this land has been promised to his descendants. Abraham, as wealthy of a man as he is, and there's multiple hints throughout the story, they will be in tonight's story as well, at his immense wealth. But despite that, he owns no land. He owns a lot of property, what we call personal property, crops and herds of various types, but he doesn't own any land, and so he needs a place to bury Sarah. And so the first, and as far as we can tell from the biblical record, the only piece of land he will ever own in this promised land is this burial plot. It's the cave of Machpelah. And he ends up, it seems from the text, he ends up buying a field in which this cave is contained. Sarah will be the first one buried there. Abraham, Rebekah, Isaac, Leah, and Jacob will later be buried there. They got to die first, but we'll later see them buried into this cave. Now, if you want to see some spiritual significance in this, is maybe the idea of Abraham knows that this is going to be homeland for his descendants. And so that burial place seems appropriate. Otherwise, it would seem odd for a man who doesn't own any land that maybe take her back to Ur of the Chaldees and bury her in her hometown or in Haran where they lived for a while. But the significance of burying here probably has to do with the hints that Abraham knows it's not our land now, but it will be. And it'll be good for our resting place to be among our descendants. And so he goes to the sons of Heth. The sons of Heth, Heth is a child of Canaan, who's a child of Ham, who's a child of Noah. And so this is Heth, Noah, Ham, Canaan, and Heth. And these Hethites, we believe the name gets kind of changed to become the Hittites. Now, we're not sure, it's a little murky here, if these are the same Hittites that live in another location, whether they've migrated down, or whether this is another group of people known as the Hittites. But regardless, Abraham approaches one of them, the descendants of Heth, a man by the name of Ephron, to buy a burial place for his wife. Now, the negotiations are a little unusual here, and from what scholars tell me, that they're unusual only to we Americans, that this was the common way to negotiate in that area. And I'll tell you that in many parts of the world, it's still a pretty common method today. And so what was the first offer made on this piece of land? Yeah, just take it. Now, to us, that sounds like just a very generous offer. Well, that's mighty nice of this man. He must respect Abraham. But scholars again tell us that that was a bargaining technique, that that's the way they would often do. And you knew, if you knew the culture, the bargaining culture, that you can't, you can't say, "Oh, well, thank you," because that would be an insult to them. Now, and I've wondered, and I don't know, a lot of time, a lot of water's gone under the bridge since then, but there are certain parts of the Oriental, the Asian world that you go today, and I know I've done this in places where and somebody will come up and give you something. And a man one time gave me a bracelet that he claimed he made, uh, and then he wanted me to have it. And then, well, okay. And I start walking away, and he chases me down wanting money. And I'm like, "What, you gave it to me?" And so I wonder, I don't know whether that was a scam or whether it's just kind of this practice. Here's a gift, but you're expected to negotiate and actually pay for it. Yeah, yeah. And so that seems to be the case here. We don't know that Ephron was really being that generous. That again, that was the kind of the normal practice of beginning the negotiations. But it seems that Abraham. Oh, Adam, go ahead.
Whenever something is given that easily, it might be taken back just as easily. There wouldn't have been the formal contract we get here later.
Oh, yeah.
We get all had to get Larry involved here for
For the legal part, yeah. And in fact, some scholars would say it would have, if he would have accepted that would have been treated as just a loan. It's not really yours. I'll let you use it. I'll let you bury your wife there, but there has to be an exchange of money for you to really own the land. And so, yes, that's what many scholars believe. But Abraham, maybe because of his immense wealth, and also maybe because of his immense grief, he's not in negotiating frame of mind. And so he way overpays for this property, uh, from what we know in Scripture. Um, because Ephron, first salvo seems very generous, but then he kind of almost, Abraham says, "No, no, I want to pay for it." And he goes, and Ephron just kind of slides in there. "Well, no, no, I'm not going to charge you 400." Well, then why did you mention it if you're not going to charge? And so Abraham again just cuts him off and just says, "Okay, I will pay that." Um, for reference sake, I don't know what the Hebrew inflation was like, but David paid 50 for the site on which the temple was built, and he's paying 400 for a burial plot. And so again, it's either because of his wealth, his grief, or maybe he just didn't want to cause problems with these people, because apparently we think they really weren't keen on giving this property, even selling this property to foreigners. And so for whatever reason, he agrees to the 400, and buries his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which is close to Hebron in the land of Canaan. And so, again, this is the only piece of land of the promised land that Abraham will ever own. It will ever be owned, as far as we know, by him or any of his descendants until they come and take possession of the land uh, generations later. And so we record now the death of Sarah and her burial. Now in chapter 24, um, it says, "When Abraham was old, well advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things." Um, so we know from chapter 23, if we know Sarah's death, again, you have to have your uh, calculator out, or your pen and paper out to do all this math. We can figure out how old uh, the son Isaac was. We also know how old Abraham was. If she was 127, then Abraham was 137 when she died. And so there's your definition of old, well advanced in age. He would have been at least 137, because he's 137 when she died. About 3 years are going to transpire between her death and Isaac getting married. And that's what this story in chapter 24 is all about. In chapter 25, verse 20, it says, Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife. And so he's 37 when his mother dies, 40 when he gets married. And so we don't know how long it took the journey to go get his wife and how long of engagement period they had, but somewhere in a 3-year period is when we're looking at. We're in chapter 24. And so Abraham goes to his oldest servant of his house. Now, we don't know who that is. We know an earlier servant that would be the oldest servant in his house by this time. But again, many scholars think he was probably too old to undertake this task, and so he may have been dead by now, and this is another older servant. And there is a reason we think that is. If he's mentioned before by name, why not mention him by name here? And so probably another servant than Eleazar. And so he tells him in verse 2, the servant who ruled all over all that he had, please put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord. Now that seems a little strange, but you think about it, it's really, well, uh, we'll get to that later. Maybe it's a little bit stranger, but we think about us, we put our hand over our heart, our hand on the Bible. If you're going to court and you're going to do the swearing, put your hand there. And we do different little gestures like that somebody else would go, well, that's weird. Why did all those Americans put their hand over their heart when the music started playing? Just so all little things like that are weird if they're not normal to you as an outsider. So this just seemed to be the way that a vow or a charge that was placed to someone. Now, I want to be delicate here, but thigh is probably a euphemism. We read at least 2 places in Scripture where that same word is sometimes translated loins, and it refers to where your descendants would come from. And so we'll leave it at that. So put your hand under my thigh, and I'll make you swear by the Lord that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. So I want you to go find a wife for my son. Now, already, if the swearing part wasn't weird, then this is weird, certainly from our way of doing things. Usually, your son goes and finds his own wife and then brings her back to that. But so already different. You go out and you just blindly find this wife for my son. But the one stipulation is don't make it one of these local women. Now, the question would immediately arises, why? What did Abraham have against the Canaanite women? Were they all just unattractive, or what's the beef here?
Keep the lineage clean.
Okay, he does go back, and again, weird to us, goes back and gets Isaac's cousin. And so we're keeping the lineage real clean in that. We might at first think, of the later prohibitions. Remember, the Israelites, his descendants, when they become a nation, are forbidden from intermarrying with these people. Now, it might be a foreshadowing of that, but I wouldn't see in that that's exactly what's going on here, because we're going to find out later that these people, Abraham's family back at home, are idolaters. Laban, and particularly later Laban and Rachel, it's all part of this same family. We're going to find out that they're idolaters. And so what's the difference between their idolatry and the Canaanites' idolatry? And so a couple other maybe speculative reasons. One that Max gave, we're going back to the family tree, literally. It might be a little bit of a foreshadowing of that my descendants will be prevented from doing this, and so I want that to be prevented from them. But it also might be marriage many times in that day was more than just a contract between two people who loved one another, that it also involved some kind of sometimes business. And so it may be that Abraham doesn't want Isaac to have any right to any land, that this God has promised this. And I've learned my lesson in trying to help God fulfill his promises. And so if Isaac is married into some wealthy landowner's family, then he's going to get 5,000 acres of Canaan land. And that's not the way we're supposed to get this land. So that's another possibility, is I just don't want him have any right to any land here other than what God will deliver for us. Larry?
Children who married Canaanite women, who had children who married Canaanite women, eventually they're Canaanite,
Yeah. Yeah, they get embedded, and so they end up taking over the land through assimilation almost. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But now I've inherited. Once father-in-law dies, now I own this land. And so it may be two things at play there. Also remember that Abraham, that he knows that we're going to have to leave this land for a while and then come back. And so it will be easier for Isaac and whatever generation it needs to be if we don't have family here. We don't have roots here. So that could be it as well.
Some families just want their blood only to be, I don't know, it's strange. I've heard some different stuff.
Yeah. The closest thing that I think of is the royal family a few generations back. Yeah.
Painting.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that clean bloodline. And so that's kind of what he says. You go back to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for Isaac. And that's exactly what is going to happen. And so this servant goes back to that native homeland, back to Abraham's family. Abraham says, don't take Isaac with you. Again, we could speculate as to why that is the case. But go, and he will send his angel before you, verse 7 says, and you'll take a wife for my son from there. It seemed to indicate my angel before, or his angel before you. Is that just a promise or a belief on Abraham's part of protection for this servant, or that you're not really going to be the one choosing him? That God's going to be involved in this decision. I'm not sure exactly how he means that, protection or guidance, or maybe both. If the woman's not willing to follow you, verse 8, then you'll be released from this oath. And so you might think, well, great, I got to go I'm going to have to kidnap her, do the old caveman thing, knock her in the head and drag her back. No, if you do your best and you can't convince her to come, then you've done your part. So he took 10 of his master's camels. So again, that's an indication of Abraham's wealth, of these camels. And seemingly the indication whether the camels were going to be the gift or the camels were the conveyance. They were carrying all of these things in his hands. He goes to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. He made his camels kneel down outside the city by a well of water at evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. And now he prays, O Lord God of my master Abraham, please give me success this day and show kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I stand here by the well of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now let it be that the young woman to whom I say, please let down your pitcher that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I will also give your camels a drink. Let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. So again, we're not told all of the thought process. Does the servant, did he come up with this idea himself? If so, God's not obligated. God, you do this. Well, God doesn't have to do what we say, but it seems to be a part of it. So did he come up with this idea himself, or does he understand that statement? The angel of God will go before you as not just protection, but as guidance. But regardless, he says, this I will know that you've shown kindness to my master. And as so often is the case in Scripture, before he had finished speaking, that behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her pitcher on her shoulder. And so, if you can do the family tree there and figure it out, I think maybe, let me see. Well, the first thing we want to talk about is this kind of fake family tree that we've put up here. And remember that we're going to see a lot of descendants just kind of fade into obscurity. We're just interested in one specific bloodline. This isn't the history of all the people of all the world. This is the history of this one narrow bloodline. We're going to see Ishmael. He's not a part of that line. And some other descendants born to Abraham, and they're not a part of this line. It's just Isaac and just this bloodline that is there. Okay, here we are. Here's this bloodline. We started with Terah. Nahor there. Let me see if I can. There we go. Nahor is the brother of Abraham. He has a son named Bethuel, and Bethuel has two children that are named here, Laban and Rebekah. And here is Rebekah. Now, what's interesting and makes sense is that our generations are going to be offline here. And that makes sense because we're assuming that Nahor and Mrs. Nahor had children in the normal course of events. And remember, Abraham and Sarah, they're the people at the school function that say, "Oh, your grandpa's here." No, that's my dad. Because of the difference. So because of that, we're offline with our generations, and so if our rendering is right, here is Rebekah, and so she would be a first cousin once removed from Isaac, if there's nothing missing from the bloodline that is there. So Abraham's son Isaac, and now is going to marry Rebekah, who is Abraham's brother's granddaughter. Okay, there'll be a test afterwards, all this. And so there's the family tree as we have it. Remember that name Laban. We're not going to think very highly. He's a little slimy here. He gives the rise to maybe many of the in-law jokes because the family's going to have to deal with him. Here's another, and you think that other one was convoluted. Here's a little different view of that. Here is Abraham and Sarah, and they have their son Isaac, who now marries Rebekah, who again is the daughter of Bethuel. Again, just a different way of indicating the bloodline there. And so Rebekah is the one, and as the prayer request was from this servant, she does just as he had indicated. She went down to the well, filled her pitcher, and came up. And the servant said, "Let me have a little drink of water from your pitcher." And she had finished giving him a drink. She said, "I will draw water for your camels also until they have finished drinking." Now, I don't know what to make of this. Is this just a way to find out, if she does this, then I'll know that that's hers. It's just a sign. But this was also a sign of something else, that what a go-getter she is, because she says to your camels have finished drinking. Well, if you know anything about camels or know very little about camels, you know they love to drink. They can drink up to 25 gallons, and there's 10 of them. Now, I don't know that they were that thirsty at this time, but that's a lot of water she's drawing out. If you just one camel, drawing out, but she's drawing out enough until 10 camels who've just been on a journey. Now, we don't know when they took their last pit stop, but been on a journey and are probably pretty thirsty. And so it's an indication, not just a sign, hey, God, let me know which one it is, but let's pick out one that's not afraid to work. In fact, if you go through this section and just count the number of verbs associated with Rebekah, they're numerous. And so she was an industrious, a hardworking, and a generous. She shows the common hospitality of that day. That here's a stranger, and she volunteers not only to let him have a drink, but to supply a lot of water, most likely, to these camels. Did I see Mark? Yeah.
True. I had watched the documentary. Those wells, whenever they had them, they were many steps down deep to have to go down just to get the water.
Yeah.
Could you imagine? Have to get all the water for all the camel.
Yeah, it's not just she was having to, get the pump primed and get it going. Yeah, it was. Yeah, yeah, and she had again. We don't know how big she had a pitcher. Now, how big can something be and still be classified as a pitcher? I'm not sure, but if she was able to carry it, you're not bringing up 50 gallons of water at a time. Yeah, yeah, you're making multiple trips. So yeah, it does speak to her industriousness, certainly. Adam.
Way of looking at that is that Rebecca and Laban are cut from the same cloth, that she sees the dollar signs right away. If a camel was a sign of wealth, here's 10 camels. And then there's the idea too that it wasn't just 10 camels to show I have 10 camels. They're all carrying swag too.
Yeah, yeah.
Pull up at the gas pump and, hey, would you wash the windows on my Toyota Camry that's 20 years old here? Here we've got a line of 10 Rolls Royces. Would you mind? Yeah, I'll check the air in the tire.
Yeah. You might leave a nice tip. Yeah, yeah. Could be that as well. Yeah. And so he inquires, "Who are you? Who are you the daughter to?" And she tells that. And now it says Rebekah, verse 29, had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran out to the man by the well. And I think certainly Laban saw the dollar signs there. He saw the nose rings and the bracelets on his sister's wrist. When he heard the words of his sister Rebekah saying, "Thus the man spoke to me," that he went to the man, and he stood by the camels at the well. Now, I don't want to paint Laban to be a complete, jerk here. He is looking out for his sister. That's what he should do. And he says, "Come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I've prepared the house and a place for the camels." And so he unloads the camels, provides straw and feed, water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. And they provide him some food to this servant, and he says, "Nope, nope, I'm cut right to the chase. We'll talk business before we eat." And he says, "The Lord has blessed my master greatly, and he's become great, and he's given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male and female servants, and camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old, and to him he has given all that he has." So again, maybe kind of sweetening the deal there. "Now my master made me swear, saying, you won't take a child from among the Canaanites." And he gets down to the nitty gritty in verse 39. "Perhaps the woman will not follow me." But he says that again, he would send an angel with you to prosper your way, and you'll take a wife from my son, for my son, from my kindred and from my father's house. You will be clear from this oath when you arrive among my kindred. And so Rebekah comes out, verse 45. Let's skip ahead. "But before I had finished speaking in my heart, there was Rebekah coming out with her pitcher on her shoulder, and she went down to the well and drew water. And I said, 'Please let me drink.' And she made haste and said, 'Drink, and I'll give your camels to drink.'" And so he's filling them in. Oh, the story of how they meet. Laban and Bethuel, verse 50, says that if the thing comes from the Lord, we cannot speak to you either bad or good. Here is Rebekah before you. Take her and go, and let her be your master's son's wife, as the Lord has spoken. Again, all that just seems strange to us, unless she was just a problem child. Why would you say, like, take her and go? But we don't read it that way at all. But it just seems strange. But again, it's strange just because that's not the way we do courtship and marriage. It would have been very common in that day in that culture. But also remember that, let me go back, the other family tree is a little easier to follow. They would have known who Abraham was. So it's not like just some stranger shows up and says, I need a wife for this fella back home, go take her. It's not a complete stranger that this is, again, Bethuel, who would have been the major decision maker here. Seems that Laban has some skin in the game as well, but Bethuel, this would have been, just one generation removed from Abraham, Abraham's nephew there. And so, again, it's not maybe as strange when we consider the culture and the time, and also because they're not giving him up to a stranger. This is to our kinsman Abraham. Adam.
One, I am only been focusing on this more that, I had always just thought, Abraham just kind of wandered off whenever God called him to go and just, lost touch with everybody, wasn't much for sending each other texts every day.
Yeah.
Kind of almost a shot in the dark to have the servant come back and, try and find him with everybody was moving around. I thought there was a whole lot more of God's providence in that, but chapter 22, verse 20, that it came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, indeed, Milcah has borne children and all this, So there was some correspondence or messengers or something back and forth, that, it makes me wonder if he was getting news of what happened to the family at home, what news had got to them.
Yeah.
Did they send a messenger to let them know that Sarah died? Did they know there was an Isaac already? How much back and forth did they have? And I never remembered that section there in 22 about him knowing.
Yeah, not as frequent as like you said, text messages, and so those correspondences we assume would have been few and far between. But in 37 years of Isaac's life, we can assume there may have been some knowledge in that conduit going back and forth. So yeah, that's a good point. And so now he is married. Chapter 25 is going to tell us about Abraham getting married. Now, we have to be careful here because ancient historians, including biblical historians, remember they don't write on a strict chronological timeline. And so what happens in chapter 12 is not immediately after what happens in chapter 11. They don't, our minds work that way, their minds don't. And we know that because chapter 25 is going to tell us about two things: him marrying a woman by the name of Keturah and Abraham dying. So Abraham dies in chapter 25. Later in that chapter, Isaac's twin sons are born. And so it makes it sound like Abraham dies and then Jacob and Esau are born. That's not the way it would have happened. Jacob and Esau would have been 15 years old when Abraham dies. And so we're not following this story chronologically. And again, we know that because we can do the math with the ages of different things. And so Jacob and Esau would have been about 15 years old when Abraham died. So we're not following this chronologically. And so, in other words, it's not to be assumed that here's Abraham and Sarah. Sarah dies. Abraham mourns a respectable period of time, and then he marries again. It's more likely that maybe he was married to Keturah before Sarah dies. Polygamy was fairly common in those days. And one reason, this is not absolute proof of that, but notice now, how old was Abraham when Isaac was born? Yeah. And so remember, it was shocking that he was having children at 100. He's now 137 when Sarah dies. And notice what it says in chapter 25. Abraham again took a wife, and her name was Keturah, and she bore him Zimram, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, Shua. And so it was remarkable among remarkable that he has a child at 100, but now at 137 he has 6 more. And so more than likely that maybe these marriages over. I can't prove that, but there's some other evidences in this to maybe indicate that this wasn't on the chronological timeline. We don't know is the basic thing. Now you might ask why we're told about Keturah, this other wife of Abraham. And it seems to me that verse 2 is the main reason. One of those sons is a man by the name of Midian. Now remember over in chapter 17, we won't turn back there, chapter 17, verse 5, Abraham is promised that he would be the father of many nations. Now, we think of the nation, land, and seed promise that's going to be fulfilled through Isaac, the nation of Israel. But Abraham was promised that he would be the father of many nations, not just the nation. Again, we go back to our other timeline. We only care about the one nation. But we've already have the origin of the Ishmaelites through Ishmael. We have now the Midianites through his son Midian, through Keturah. Lot's descendants, and I know this isn't Abraham's descendants, but through Lot's descendants, we have the Moabites and the Ammonites. And so we're doing two things. We're seeing that the promise to Abraham is being fulfilled, the father of many nations, but we're also getting the origin story of some of these nations that we're going to encounter: the Moabites, Ammonites, Ishmaelites, Midianites, the Hittites, all of these nations that we're going to come into contact with later. We're getting kind of the origin stories, if you will. Larry?
Writing the children of Israel, they're sitting there in the desert waiting to take over the promised land. And, this will be a guidebook. Okay, these are the people we're going to run into, and this is where they came.
Yeah, yeah. And here's some of our past interactions with them and how they got to be who they are and why they're so mad, maybe in some cases. So, all right, we'll have to put a pin there. Chapter 25 will go on. That's where we'll pick up with the birth of Jacob and Esau.